You're now at oh, here's the recording.
Yeah, sorry, I was late getting it going. Could
All
everyone
good.
please mute yourselves and I'll mute myself, but sorry, apologies if you could kind of, start over.
Sure thing. So getting the tech right is really important because I'm sure you've all had the experience where you're reading a book or watching a show and something happens and you're like, oh wait, this is nonsense. That doesn't work that way. And the second that happens, you've broken your immersion in the narrative, which is the worst thing that can happen because you want to be immersed. That's the whole point of stories. And then you start nitpicking because you're not immersed, you're not flowing along with the way the story is going. Now you start to see all the tiny flaws. And if you're writing, you want to avoid losing this reader trust kind of at all costs, because no person can put together a completely perfect story. It just doesn't happen. There's no such thing. But an amazing story will keep you so immersed that you don't notice, this part was a tiny bit wrong or whatever. And keeping the tech right in your fiction is one of the best ways to avoid breaking this trust. So you already know you need to do research to write most fiction. And it doesn't actually matter what kind of fiction, because you as a single human don't know everything, right? So whether it's a medical drama or a historical adventure, corporate espionage, whatever it is, there's always something you need to research. And what we're going to talk about today, so we're going to talk about what kind of cool things are happening in tech today that you may have heard of, you may not have heard of, and you may not know some of the debates and implications that are happening in the tech field about those pieces of technology. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how you think about your own research for your work. So technology today is pretty darn cool. We are going to go through a few of these cool topics with just the latest and greatest. And what we're going to talk about is how, anything you write set in the present or future should build on this technology. All of this cool stuff, if you're writing about something in the future, it should be at least this cool because technology builds on itself. And there's a big asterisk next to the should, because this is like any other writing advice. Any writing advice is always going to have an asterisk on it. And here, if your tech is older in your hard SF story or simpler, you need to make sure that there's a good reason why humanity suddenly forgot this other cool stuff that's going on. You can totally decide to do that, but then you just need to know why. So let's start with the easiest, simplest thing. Let's talk about, why is this doing this to me? Sorry about that. Mobile technology. So you all remember when all of these different items were separate items and you used all of them. And if you wanted to have access to all of these things, you needed really, really big pockets to carry everything around everywhere. And of course, today we don't do this anymore. But one of the interesting things is how human behavior has changed with this. How often do you guys today read a book, watch a movie, whatever, where the character has, for example, a physical alarm clock? And then how many people today actually still use a physical alarm clock instead of just using their phone? Okay, at least one of you. But the point is that as technology changes, human behavior en masse changes, perhaps not every individual person. And that's the first thing to think about when you are incorporating technology. Is your character a 13-year-old? They probably have their first phone and they probably don't even know what some of these things are. We forget just how tied to our phones we actually get. But that's just the tiniest tip of the iceberg. So mobile tech right now is incredible. The biggest thing that has changed is the cloud. Everything is connected, so everything is super, super powerful. So what the biggest thing this means is that you have these massively distributed computational engines, right? So like think audio processing. This is, Siri and Alexa and so on. when you're talking to them, they need to figure out your tonality, your slang, your accent. Do you have a cold that day? All of which changes what you sound like and how they can parse this language. And because the phone is connected to the cloud, they don't need to do these computations on the device itself, which means that the phone suddenly has become this incredibly powerful nexus for anything that could possibly happen. The camera has gotten perhaps more advanced than some of us realize. So we've got facial recognition, we've got handprint recognition, even something as silly as like the Snapchat thing where you can vomit rainbows. It needs to compute on the fly what part of your face is your mouth and where your face is in the first place, and then put the rainbow on it. And it does this so quickly because it can tap into the cloud. And a lot of technologies out there are using these new types of visual computation to do cool new stuff. So Cameo Cam is a type of security camera. You can set it up with your old phone, just looking out the window, and you can do a search for brown to see if the UPS truck actually came by today or not, because it can now search that. MIT has figured out how to detect super, super tiny changes in color. So using a regular camera and their phone camera and their calculations, you can actually see somebody's heartbeat, because everybody's skin tone, regardless of the color of your skin, gets a tiny, tiny bit redder when the blood is closer to the surface. So every heartbeat, you get a tiny bit redder. And with your naked eye, you can't see this. But with this kind of phone computation, and then enhancing that delta, suddenly you can. And suddenly it's very easy to monitor, say, an infant that you're having trouble hooking up to a regular heart monitor. You've got something like Google Lens, which just straight up tells you what you're looking at, which sounds like a cool thing from the future, but it's actually pretty good, especially with things like monuments and mountains and large things like that. And then your other sensors on your phone are doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So you don't even notice most of the times when your phone adjusts its screen brightness, but it does this because it detects how bright the world around it is at the time, the environment around it. You've got your fitness monitors, which are just using the barometer and the gyroscope and the GPS and the compass to figure out, are you walking? Are you running? Are you on an elliptical? And then let's give you credit for doing that actual exercise. There is a company called SelfDriving, which uses those same sensors on the phone to measure how safe a driver you are. So are you swerving? Are you speeding? If you crashed, were you clearly doing something you shouldn't? And then its technology lets anybody else build on the technology. So some folks have built an app that lets your phone figure out if you've been in a crash. And then if you don't tell it, no, I'm okay, within, I don't know, a minute, 5 minutes, whatever it is, it'll call an ambulance for you. That's today. That's happening right now. And then, of course, you have the contextual adaptability, right? Your phone, because it's connected to all these things and knows where you are, knows what kind of stuff you care about right now. If it knows that every day you go into this boba shop and today you didn't, perhaps today is the day that the boba shop gives you a coupon to make sure you actually still go back there. Your phone has your location history, your phone has your search history, your phone has all these contextual adaptations so that it can serve up information and be as useful to you as possible. This includes phones, they figure out that you're driving, it turns on driving mode so that it's a safer experience. Like it'll read your texts out loud to you so that you don't have to take your eyes off the road. The phone can be in the same sort of contextual adaptability because it knows where you are and where you are in relation to other items. The phone becomes the central hub for anything that's a smart home. You can set it up so that as long as your phone's in your pocket, you walk into this room and it sets the temperature the way you like and the lights the way you like, and perhaps add a little Beethoven because you've had a hard day. So what it means, so even today, your phone can do kind of almost anything technology can do because it's so connected. And what people are able to do with just the sensors on the phone itself is pretty astonishing. So your science fictional phone had better be able to do at least this kind of cool stuff, if not much, much cooler. Let's talk about nanotech. So this is technology at a molecular or atomic scale. Science has let us move individual atoms around to create new types of materials. The biggest one right now is carbon nanotubes. So these are cylindrical tubes that are a single light and strong carbon molecule. And if you go online and you look for a hydraulic press and like just go on YouTube, just hydraulic press and carbon fiber, you can see a block of this material withstand tens of thousands of pounds of force and have nothing happen to it. I've never seen one of these hydraulic press videos where the hydraulic press did not win. So it's pretty incredible. But these things that are strong and light, I mean, you can now put these in anything, right? So now we've got fabrics that provide lightweight ballistic energy deflection in personal body armor. Or you can have fabrics that resist wrinkling, staining, and bacterial growth. And bacterial growth is why your clothes get stinky. And it would be amazing to have more clothes that don't get stinky. And that technology is available today. These materials can be very light and they can be clear as well, which means you can have clear nanoscale films on glasses and computer and camera displays, on windows, other surfaces. You can make them water resistant, residue resistant, anti-reflective, self-cleaning, resistive to UV or IR light. They could be anti-fog, antimicrobial, electrically conductive. You're suddenly able to imbue all these other items with these cool new properties that can be really, really useful. And this is also great for sustainability. So these materials are so lightweight and very, very capable, which means that we can swap them for a lot of existing materials that we use today. So better materials that are lighter. You can make lightweight cars, trucks, airplanes, boats, spacecraft, right? All of these things that saves on fuel, which both makes it more sustainable, but also makes it more possible to do whatever it is you're trying to do with these modes of transportation in the first place. Nanotech is helping us convert cellulose from wood chips and corn stalks and unfertilized perennial grasses much, much more efficiently into ethanol for fuel. Nanotech is helping high power rechargeable battery systems for cars, which Tesla has essentially a battery that looks like a wall. And it's using nanotech to do that, to make this all more efficient and more sustainable. And they also, nanomaterials are helping reduce pollutants in petroleum refining processes. So what this all means in terms of your fiction, so your materials, the existing materials that you have today can do a lot more than you give them credit for. So if it's the future and people are still doing laundry just as often, I would want to know why things haven't improved in that regard, since we can actually improve that today. Let's talk about 3D printing. So you probably all know this, but I'm going to go over it just in case. 3D printing is a new way of building things by adding material layer by layer. So imagine you're going to squeeze out like a tube of toothpaste, and you can sort of squeeze it out in a circle, and then you can squeeze it out in another circle on top of that circle and slowly build up until you have a cylinder. So that's the really, really rough principle of how 3D printing works, only instead of toothpaste, it's almost any material out there by now. And the layers are really, really thin, and it's not your hand, it's a machine. So it's super, super steady, and there's an elaborate plan. And the biggest thing about 3D printing is that suddenly you can have mass customization. This has really upended how manufacturing works. You go from the Industrial Revolution showed us all that making stuff in bulk can be more efficient. But making stuff in bulk usually requires the same mold or template for whatever the stuff is. It's never really been efficient to make mass customization of anything. But 3D printing completely changes that. You can do custom stuff at scale, and that can be custom jewelry, custom prosthetic limbs, custom orthopedic shoes, you name it. And it used to be that 3D printing was really only in different types of polymers. You would have different types of plastics, you would have some laser sintering stuff going on. And that's great, but plastic is very limiting, and it's also pretty bad for the environment. But this technology has improved so that we're actually using lots and lots of different materials that can be 3D printed, and therefore you can have this mass customization. So you can print 3D houses out of concrete in disaster zones. You can make protein treats that look like and are flavored like sushi. You can make chocolate in shapes that traditional molds just can't handle, just because topology is a thing. You can print gold jewelry. You can print custom glass labware, and you can print cells. You can 3D print a scaffold and then print living cells on top of that to eventually grow and become an organ. And we haven't figured this out for every organ, but we've 3D printed ears, for example. And it is really nice to have an availability for a brand new ear, especially if you can make it match your other ear, and not just have to be some other random person's ear that got grafted on. And so in uses, so one of the biggest things here is actually in medicine. Dentistry has been using 3D printing since like the 70s, which I think most of us didn't know about. I certainly didn't until I had a 3D printing client. But in medicine, especially right now, this is amping up because customization in medicine is everything, right? From teeth to tracheas. There has been a 3D printed trachea that was implanted in somebody. That's already happened. It's also great in space, because if you're going to space and stuff might break, you can either bring one of every tool to fix whatever might break, or you could bring the thing that could make whichever tool you happen to need at the time, and you can save on space, you can save on weight, you can save some organizational mess. It becomes really, really efficient. And it's also great for remote areas of Earth. So there are some remote villages that need orthopedic shoes and glasses and so on. And these are things that really need to be customized per person. And just from a supply chain perspective, it's much, much easier to drop in a 3D printer with instructions than it is to go back and forth with everybody's individual measurements and then have to bring back, you know, the lenses and the soles of the shoes and whatever else. So what 3D printing means is custom everything everywhere. This idea of mass manufacturing is suddenly turned on its side because absolutely everything can be customized. Let's talk about self-driving cars. They're around. They work. They are on average today safer than the average human driver. They are safer than you think, but they're also dumber than you think. Every so often, one of my favorite self-driving cars stories is an Australian one, where there was suddenly a problem with kangaroos, because a self-driving car will look at an object and see how big it's supposed to be and figure out how far it is, and based on that knows whether to swerve or not. But the problem is that kangaroos are large and jump. And if they're suddenly in midair, it looks like initially to a car that it's something much, much larger and much, much further away, until it comes back and suddenly it, back to the ground, and suddenly it got measured as something very, very close and entirely a new problem that you didn't swerve in time to miss. And this is the sort of thing that humans know this instinctively, that just because a kangaroo is jumping, it's not suddenly really far away and huge, and then comes back. But you need to think about that to program that into the cars. So there's still little things like that cars are hitting today. There's an example that just happened recently with a Tesla self-driving thing, where the car in question was behind a truck that was carrying lots and lots of traffic lights. And the car got really confused about whether it needed to pay attention to these traffic lights, because a truck full of traffic lights is just not a common use case anywhere. So, but despite these things where, you get these funny little one-offs that can, as soon as you find out about them, they're easy to fix. Self-driving cars today are still much safer on average than humans, but you don't see them everywhere. And this is one of those things we were just talking before this started about the difference between science and technology. Technology is not going to really happen unless people adopt the technology. And one of the biggest things here is liability. So let's say a self-driving car has hit a person and there was an error. So whose error was it? Was it the programmer's error? Was it the manufacturer's error? Was it faulty operation that, the person in the car gave some instruction to the car that the car had to follow? Who does the insurance company sue? Because they're going to want to sue somebody. We don't actually know. And how does insurance even work anymore? And doesn't this change kind of what we think about what it means to be a car, or even a street once there's more of this? And what happens to all the people who drive for a living? Are they going to get priced out of the market by their own car? Do we commute differently? There's all these big questions that we just haven't figured out the answers to. And we're not going to implement a broad self-driving car shift until these things are figured out, which tells you that you've got these societal implications of technology. And your technology can be absolutely amazing, but until you figure out these societal implications, it might go nowhere. And what's even worse than the liability is the ethics. Even gnarlier problems. So we generally don't like machines making ethics decisions for us. Even today, there are still drone operators before there's a drone strike. You could talk about the ethics of that, and that is separate, because that also gets gnarly, but there's still a human involved, and we don't like it when there isn't a human involved. And so should a car that's about to hit a school bus full of kids swerve and hit a minivan full of kids instead? We really don't like a machine making that assessment. How about, if there's an old person and a young person in a crosswalk and you have to hit one of them, should there be a choice? We don't yet know how any of this is going to play out. And as a species, we are wildly uncomfortable with not having a human make that call. So this is another barrier that is keeping us from really implementing self-driving cars just everywhere, even though they are already going to save lives from where they are today, just because we as a species are uncomfortable. And this is going to take a little while. Let's talk about VR and AR. It's been around for years. It's only now getting a bit more uptake. Virtual, just to be super clear, virtual reality has the user in a headset, possibly additional sensory inputs like tactile gloves or similar. And it makes the user perceive themselves to be in a different reality altogether. Whereas augmented reality shows what's actually around you at the time, but overlays things on top. So when you have smart glasses that tell you what you're looking at, and they'll have like the caloric estimates for the food that's in front of you, that's AR. Whereas when you are in a castle fighting dragons, that's VR. Unless you happen to go to a castle in Scotland and they have an AR experience because the castle's already there. You know what I mean. These uses, primarily they have historically been for entertainment, right? You've got your video games and so on, but they're starting to be used in additional ways. So Lego is using AR to make a model of a spaceship appear above the box that has the Legos for that spaceship. So that you can, as you turn the box around, you can turn the 3D model around and really get a sense of, is this the spaceship that you and your kids want to build and play with? Medical tech uses a lot of VR for training for surgeries, and then on occasion actually uses AR during surgery to overlay information to make it much easier to know where to cut. And this is especially great if you've done a bunch of imaging of the patient beforehand and you know that this organ is in a funny shape. You can just overlay that direct data over the patient themselves so that you cut exactly. So you can cut exactly where you need to and not, a centimeter off to the side, and be much more effective. There's apps for storytelling, like the New York Times started doing a thing where you can take the viewer into these war-torn areas of the world and really be immersed in seeing the tragedy unfold. You look around and there's apps for storytelling where you can see the story and there's actually a narrative, and you turn this way and there's a comet coming down, and you turn that way and there's all the dinosaurs running away from the comet, and you can feel like you're much more part of whatever it is. They're even doing this in cake decorating, where you can print out an edible QR code, slap it on top of a cake, look at the cake through your phone, and now there's a dragon on your cake, and you've made a much cooler decoration for the cake than if you had to like sit and sculpt it. So it's all over the place. And the interesting thing here is the tech is here, but people aren't always here for it. VR is great for gaming, but one of the interesting things about it is that traditionally, the technology has been such that people assigned male at birth do great with it, and people assigned female at birth get really nauseous with it. And so it's just not been designed for the entire population. And that anything that hasn't been designed with everybody in mind is, of course, going to have slower uptake. And some things have failed because of how people behave. So I used to work at Google, and Google had launched a thing called Google Glass, which was a little AR display that sat right here. And when they were testing it, there was this idea that in order to take a photo and post it to your social media, you would just quickly look up like this. And what wound up happening is that somebody was in the bathroom wearing Google Glass. Somebody else called their name. They quickly put their head up to see, who's calling their name. And some very not safe for work scenarios ensued. All of these things, you think about the societal norms of the things that we actively think about. There's also all of the unconscious behaviors that we don't think about. And any of these technologies can run into those as well in unexpected ways. So these technologies, they're already in use today. We're going to expect more, I think, as we figure out the social bits. I want to say that Facebook is getting ready to try launching an AR display glasses sort of situation. Facebook is a little bit better at understanding human behavior than Google, but I think it still has a bit of a ways to go until we all get comfortable with it. So there's a ways to go, but I don't think it'll take nearly as long as self-driving cars to be really, really prevalent, just because the societal implications are much easier to handle and deal with, and because your VR and AR is much less likely to kill someone. And speaking of doing things to people, let's talk about CRISPR. So this is a type of gene engineering. Studies show that we can correct genetic defects. We can do this sometimes for people who are already out and about, and sometimes in utero. It's been done for cystic fibrosis, cataracts, and more. And in general, we all get pretty squeamish and weird about mucking around with human DNA. We're much, much more okay with mucking around with plants and bacteria than we are with animals, much less humans. But we're already starting to do this, right? You've got all these things about GMOs happening. So how do we use CRISPR to solve human problems without fiddling with humans? So you've got drought-resistant plants that mitigate hunger and help combat the effects of climate change. There's virus-resistant yogurt cultures. We're doing a lot more as we're understanding the human biome, especially the microbiome of the gut flora. And there's a lot we can do with CRISPR to help fix that, especially as we're seeing that that has implications on people's immune systems and so on. But then you get the ethics, and this gets really gnarly. And I would even say gnarlier than having a car decide if they're going to kill the kid or the grandma in the crosswalk. Because when we're thinking about humans, like, when is it okay? Is it okay in utero? Is it okay just for disorders, or is it okay for anything? Could you modify your embryo to have different colored eyes or higher intelligence? And how much of this is just straight up eugenics, which we try to avoid, ideally? That would be bad. And the disability community in particular has very strong opinions about people genetically modifying their type of disability out of existence. But then what about animals? So GMOs are sometimes awesome and sometimes have unintended side effects on the rest of the population, and who gets to decide? So just recently, actually, there were human monkey chimera embryos created in China. And ethicists are up in arms because I think broadly as a species, we agree that you should not do that. Maybe don't make new species that are part human, at least. that would be bad. And can you use CRISPR to grow part of an embryo that's then used to grow organs for humans? Is that okay? Is it okay to edit a person in a way that just affects themselves? Or what about editing a person in a way that also affects their progeny? So there was another Chinese study that showed they could modify adult human DNA with CRISPR that made people more resistant to HIV, which is great. But then because it's straight to your DNA, you would also pass it on to your progeny. And is that okay? And these are just giant, big questions that nobody knows. So I think from what to expect about it, definitely expect more life-saving medicine. I don't think anyone's going to have a problem with you tinkering around with DNA in order to save that particular person's life. More climate change mitigating crops and livestock, and this might also help save some species that are very endangered and going extinct. But anything else, like this is a wide open field with, I think the absolute gnarliest ethical questions are right in here. But the technology exists today, we just haven't answered the ethics. Let's talk about soft robots. So usually when you think about robots, you think of very hard-shelled and hard interior machines. But if you look at nature, most things are squishy. Even things that have a hard shell are squishy on the inside. And this lets people, animals, plants, bacteria, et cetera, be much more flexible. And I'm just gonna roll with the pun about what it is they can actually do. It's easier to pick things up. It's easier to maneuver things. It's easier to interact. So these materials are lighter and more durable. They're more easy to replace. They're more flexible. Sometimes they're self-healing, which is great. And it makes them more medically safe. So there are soft robots that kind of act like an inside-out snake. And when I say inside out, I mean, imagine a tube that's been pushed in on itself and then slowly almost like inflates to push itself back out. And these are inflatable robots that behave kind of like snakes, even though snakes don't grow in that way. And they're used to look for survivors in rubble. They can maneuver around in ways that are really unsafe for humans and really difficult if the robot were hard-shelled. It wouldn't be able to squeeze into all those different spaces. It's helping with, as you can see in the image, prosthetics. And then some of the techniques used in this are 3D printing so that you can print your flexible materials in a customized way so that this is better for medical uses. People are using origami to better collapse and expand things that then take up less space. The James Webb Telescope, I believe, has a plan for a giant foil solar sail. And the way to get it up there is to make it super, super thin and super compact. And the way to do that best to help it then expand the best is origami. So this is great these are mostly used for medical contexts right now and for search and rescue. But we expect them to be used in many, many other contexts as we figure out how to do more stuff. So when you're thinking about your own robots for your science fiction, there's a whole range of stuff between, I am hard robot and I look like I came from the 50s, and I am a full android looking exactly like a human. There's lots of squishy things in between that can also happen and be really effective. And let's talk about AI and machine learning. And this is everywhere. And just for a super quick overview, the way this works is you give an algorithm a set of test data. So for example, here's a bunch of shapes. These ones are blue circles. These ones are blue squares. These ones are green circles. These ones are green squares. Now, okay, AI, go off into the world and identify shapes. And then the AI will come back and say, this kind of looks like those things that were labeled green circles. So this is probably also a green circle. And when you add in the element of learning, then you have someone saying, you're right, that was in fact a green circle. And so the set of data that the algorithm is pulling from keeps growing and it keeps refining. And this is being used in almost every industry today, sometimes really well, and sometimes in ways that are quite dangerous. So in medicine today, AIs are actually better than doctors at finding certain kinds of tumors from imaging. And you can always go back and say, yes, we tested it and it was in fact a tumor. Congratulations, AI, you got it right. And it'll keep refining, and it refines itself in a way that actually humans don't. And it's become better at that. It can also predict drug interactions, which is very complex. It can predict protein folding. It's gotten really, really powerful. It's used in law enforcement, which is very often a problem. AI can do facial recognition, even with weird hats and facial hair and makeup. People are now in Hong Kong painting their faces in these weird blocky shapes with, here's just a big block of white and this is some gray and a stripe down here and so on, to try to confuse the facial recognition that is already happening when they are protesting Chinese occupation. And what's law enforcement can get really tricky with this, and we'll talk about biases in a second. Insurance can also use AI and machine learning to try to figure out if you were at fault in an accident or not. And it's used in retail. So there's an old example where Target figured out people's buying habits. And they figured out that right before someone got pregnant, or figured out that they were pregnant, they would buy the following set of things. And then they would start selling, congratulations on your pregnancy, here's a coupon to people. And people would be getting these before they knew they were pregnant. And they generally were pregnant. And this is really creepy, but it's a thing that absolutely happens today. And we think, if we're writing, we love science fiction, no machine is ever going to take that from us. Bad news. There are already AI and machine learning tools today that help with writing. So for example, the card game Cards Against Humanity used GPT-2 to write new cards for the game, and even use them in subsequent packs to make the game better. There's a new company called Pseudo-Write, which is a new service where you plunk in, here's the bit of the draft that you have, and then it helps you come up with new ideas for where to go when you're stuck. These are happening today. And this sounds really great and wonderful until you talk about biases, because AI and machine learning are garbage in, garbage out. And so, for example, in law enforcement, this can be really racist, because if the AI is trained on racist data, if the AI is like, let's look at what a criminal looks like, and looks at the incarcerated population of the US today, there's bias in the system as to who gets incarcerated and who doesn't. So then the output of the AI is going to be biased and racist. And then if some places are leaning on that, that's really, really problematic. Same thing happens in insurance. If they're like, oh, well, we've used these biased reasons to not give someone insurance, or to not even give someone a loan or whatever, and they live in this neighborhood, then chances are if you live in this neighborhood, we're just going to deny it for you. And it makes these biases and these inequities just worse. So this is one potential problem with AI, and it's not even evil AI, it's bad data in. But there's another problem, which is the parameters. And it's still not evil AI, it's just bad programming. So for example, if I tell an AI, I want you to optimize how to grow the most carrots. This is great, this seems very benign. If I give the AI all the and the machines that it's running all the capabilities that it could possibly need to grow carrots, and I don't say, P.S., please don't take over the world to destroy everything and replace it with carrot beds, we will have a problem, because we need to put in the right parameters for the AI to give us something that's actually useful. So I don't think we're getting to like evil conscious AI anytime soon. I think we're really, really far from that. But there are issues with AI today that are a much more realistic way for your evil AI to happen. And what all this means, For the future, I gotta tell you, I have no idea. And most of my clients are doing something with AI and machine learning. This is one of those things that touches absolutely everything. And it changes stuff in really unexpected ways. So this is something that you can just run with, let your imagination run free. Remember the principles of how this goes is more likely to go bad. I mean, if you want to write an evil conscious AI, like go nuts, but we're unlikely to get there anytime soon. So this is a few cool things that are happening. And research is a rabbit hole. We can talk about cool stuff forever. We haven't mentioned commercial spaceflight or cryptocurrency and blockchain or stem cells or drones. I mean, there's 1.5 million things going on today that are really cool. And when you're thinking about your own writing, you do want to put some boundaries on it, because otherwise you're just getting your next PhD with all the research you're doing. And that might not actually be the goal if the goal is to write, let's say, a book. So put on some boundaries. So maybe the boundary is today you only do 90 minutes of research, or maybe the boundary is you only figure out the stuff that this character actually needs to know in the context of your book, right? So your evil mad scientist in a children's book needs to know a whole lot less than your evil mad scientist in a hard SF novel. And they both need to know more than if your character is the person who just stumbled into Frankenstein's lab. So you can find these boundaries to make sure that you don't go off onto this forever. And you do want to check your work. So there's two types of ways to think about that. One is just with a regular old audience. I've had it happen once. I wrote a story for Analog, and I had a bunch of fake science and one real thing. And my editor got back to me and said, the thing that happened to be real, he's like, yeah, that's not really believable. So I had to make the choice. Do I explain this? And that was actually this really cool self-healing material thing that exists today. Like, do I spend the time to explain this? Or do I cut it out altogether because it's not actually that important to my story? Because if someone's bouncing off of it, it doesn't matter if it's real or not. It means that you've lost the reader. And the whole idea here is to not lose the reader. So that's the first kind of thing to check. But then the second thing to check is to talk to an actual expert, right? If you're writing a hard SF medical thriller, maybe talk to a doctor, or at least someone else who has written a medical thriller. They're going to know more than you. And it's just great to vet your research with somebody else. So this all sounds like a lot, but don't use it as an excuse not to write. You can research forever, you can research never. There's always a happy medium. And these little sort of checkpoints make sure that whatever you've done isn't going to lose your reader, so that you can come out with something wonderful at the end. And for the love of all things holy, please do not info dump your research. Even in hard SF, where we know that the readers want to know a lot more about the science and technology, at some point, you're no longer writing a novel, you're just writing a textbook. And if someone wanted a textbook, they would go find a textbook. You should always have a lot more in your head than what's on the page. So with all this, go write. You can write your medical thriller with soft robots. You could write your geopolitical intrigue with sabotage in space with a 3D printer. Your corporate espionage with things hidden in a company's virtual reality space. Your family drama with an ethical crisis with CRISPR in utero. Your near future memoir of a truck driver priced out of the market by their own truck, which is now running on cheap green biofuel. I mean, the sky's the limit. So go write, and remember to get the tech right.
Used to this. Well, we want to thank you for giving this wonderful talk. I'm sorry, there's a glitch in Zoom that when I go in and look at chat, my whole screen went away. It happened once before and I didn't make the connection this time. So, all right, I won't give a lot of excuses, but I just want to say that we really did enjoy your talk, and I'm now going to open it up to Q&A.
Hi. I had a question. Let's see. It was a wonderful talk. Thank you so much. I loved it. I mean, very concise and so much to think about. But one of the things I had never heard about before was the difference in virtual reality between female and male responses to it. And can you expound on that a little?
I don't know all the details, and I think I would have to look that up and get back to you. But a lot of times, especially with headsets, I don't know if it's like female heads are smaller and therefore where the eyes are in relation to the screen is a little bit different, or if we process imaging you know, at a slightly different speed or whatever. But it's consistently been an issue that people like you and me, Karen, are much more likely to get nauseous from VR in particular, not so much AR. I haven't seen that happen, or I haven't seen a study about that in AR. And I don't think they've actually figured out all the nuances of why.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that happens when people developing a technology all are, you know, sort of similar. And then they test it on themselves. They don't necessarily think about how this technology would work for people not looking like them.
Sure. I will research that because that's really interesting to me. And then the other thing that struck me is how much everything is based on ethics. You know, you have technology, but and this is such a strange time in the world.
Absolutely.
That ethics, they're just suspect all over the place. But once again, a lot to think about.
Not everybody who is making these technologies is thinking about the ethics. Sometimes the ethics show up when they are slapped with a lawsuit, but it always happens eventually.
I want to ask, this is, it seems like a perfect place for the writers, especially the fiction writers, to jump in to imagine the scenarios in which something bad might happen.
Absolutely.
And you know, not everybody, you know, the people that invent the tech aren't always the best imaginers of the future. And
some companies are actually hiring fiction writers to do exactly that, to come up with some of these fictional scenarios to help with the development. Yeah.
Really? Companies are hiring fiction writers?
Yes. Not often, and certainly not often enough.
I was going to ask, and this is like not the same question at all. Do you, in Silicon Valley, are there hard sci-fi writers groups like us that that get together and you know, talk about story ideas and read each other's manuscripts and things?
There's a really strong speculative fiction community in Silicon Valley and the San Francisco Bay Area, which kind of merge into each other. I am not familiar with a group that's just hard SF, but there are so many people that I wouldn't be surprised if there's, you know, some writers groups that really focus on that and swap manuscripts and so on. It's a very large community here, which is really lucky.
Cool.
Maybe we should start one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we here in Tucson could start one in the Bay Area as long as everything's over Zoom.
Well, we're not. Oh, Bob is saying that's what this is, but thus far we have not shared manuscripts very much, although that was one of the goals of our group, was just to do that. So maybe we should do that again. We
don't have Bill with us, who wrote Reluctant Android. Is he here today?
No, I don't believe he's signed in.
Sorry, did you say that Bill was worked on Android?
He wrote a novel called The Reluctant Android.
Oh, he wrote a novel called The Reluctant. Got it.
And you know, and that's you know, right smack dab in the middle of your you know, robotics imaginings. This android, you know, he's soft on the outside, perfect replica of a human, and in fact, he does not even know that he is not human himself. It's his boss at the tech company he works at, who first discovers during a romantic and very inappropriate, you know, workplace relationship that that he is not what he seems from the outside. And anyway, so I enjoyed Bill's novel very much, and I think he was working on a sequel last time I checked.
There's a company in Hong Kong called Hanson Robotics that is working primarily on a robot named Sophia. You can go and just search for Sophia robot.
Hansen or hand-some robots?
Hanson, but if you just search Sophia robot, Sophia with a PH, you'll find it.
Oh.
And I think that's about as good as we've gotten in a humanoid robot today. And you can see that we are still pretty far from passing as human because we are deep in the uncanny valley to the point where they actually have a YouTube show called, I think it's like Messages from the Uncanny Valley or something. And thank you, Curtis. Yeah, so they're using AI and machine learning both for the language processing of this robot and for the facial expressions of this robot, both in terms of its own facial expressions and it understanding other people's facial expressions. It is absolutely creepy.
Oh, okay. So so some speculative fiction based on the next like the next generation after that.
Yeah,
probably that would be a very helpful guide to how we're going to negotiate the you know, when it becomes, you know, when it is no longer speculative and no longer fiction. Cool.
Hi, thank you for a nice presentation. Actually, I'm interested to get your privileged position, knowing many of these characters that are at the developing these tech. My interest and it's not only, I'm interested in knowing. You said that ethics comes after. For many of these, they get discovered. I want to know, on a human level, from what your insights or your observations on these characters, these scientists, tech people, what drives them to do these things? In other words, is it a race? Is it if they don't do it, somebody else will do it? Is it, and without any idea of consequences? Many of them, come from purely STEM, things, so they don't have history, philosophy, literature even tiny background that to kind of let them pause. What's going on? I mean, it's not a consolation for somebody to tell me, oh, we messed up the stuff and sorry, we have to put controls. That's too late because it's over, it's gone.
There's a couple things at play. Part of it, and I think as science fiction writers, we can appreciate it, is that it's neat. It's just cool. So it would be fun and cool to make the robot that can do the thing. And that drives a lot of people's interest and so on. I think speed is also another one. A lot of this feels very inevitable, and you want your team at your company to get there first, because someone's going to get there no matter what, and it might as well be you. And I think another part of it is the satisfaction of solving a difficult problem. And as you said, a lot of folks don't have this more liberal arts background. So when they are defining the problem, it doesn't necessarily include some of these like ethical concerns or human behavior concerns or so on. They're just like, well, we're just going to look at this part of the problem and we're going to solve it because problem solving is very satisfying. I think you're right that there is a gap here, and that a lot of these companies perhaps need to think about ethics a little earlier on. And in my experience as a consultant, I come in with strategy and marketing. And so sometimes when I see an ethical issue, it is sometimes more effective for me, in order to get it dealt with, to frame it as a marketing problem, as opposed to this is harmful, right? Because people don't respond very well to, this is harmful, right? But you can say, I think people might not be as excited to take this up while this problem is still unsolved. And probably the thing you need to do before you get more uptake is to solve this other thing, because this will be a really, really hard sell for folks. And that kind of maneuvers in some of the ethical thinking in a capitalist cloak.
Thank you.
Thanks, Curtis.
Bye-bye, Curtis. Well, do we have any other questions, or how are we doing on that?
My question is, Effie, do we have your contact information? I was just
don't know
looking.
if you do, but Gloria does. So
Oh, fantastic.
Gloria has my email. You can always hit me up on Twitter. I'm at FES.
Okay, I just was looking back to see what Bill Adams was telling us about his novel Reluctant Android. In fact, he gave us a presentation a couple of years ago where he highlighted Sophia from Hanson Robotics. So, so the circle is complete.
There you go.
And besides sending you the information about his novel, I was going to send via, I guess we can send via Gloria, Bill's notes from when he was talking about how to write realistically about robots.
Great.
So we'll be passing on some stuff that you made us, you got us thinking about.
Great.
So thanks. I am also going to disappear, but folks, it is so good to see you. And Effie, thanks again for really stretching our brains, and and we'll be in touch.
Great.
It's hard on somebody else's keyboard. No, I'm not muted. I unmuted. I think I'm unmuted, right?
We can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Bob keeps saying you're muted. No, I'm not. Yes, everything that Bruce Bailey just said, and I'm happy to help out anytime. You can also type your own, just your email in if you wish in the chat.
Sure, why don't I do that real quick?
Before we leave, we have plenty of time, so people can copy it from there. I am having a bad problem with my terminal because I don't have a problem running these meetings, but if I show screen and then I open chat, everything is gone and my whole screen disappeared except for the part where it was your voice. And then that's why it went recording is off and recording is on, because I can't see anything. And as I'm trying to, so there's some glitch in the system that you can't run share, at least on my computer, and then open chat. After that, everything goes to hell. So now I don't even know how I will close the meeting. That's where I'm really worried, but I think it will automatically record if I just click the X. So I hope we don't lose this recording. That's my biggest worry.
You don't have to do it on this one. I'll do it.
No, I have to do it on my machine.
Right.
So I don't have to close this machine I'm on, but I have to close the meeting on mine. I think I can go back to the Zoom page and I'm just saying this aloud because if you ask about this recording, there's a slight chance that when I close, if I'm not able to do it from the Zoom homepage, that it might not record. But I think no matter how I leave, I think the recording will happen. I'm hoping so. That was very upsetting. And I'm going to try to communicate with Zoom and tell them I had this problem and I will never look at my chat again while I'm sharing a screen. So it's very depressing. Well, at least all of you got to see it. You're not in the lurch, but people that thought, oh, I won't come, I'll see it when they put it up, me. But I hope that's not the case. I think we'll be fine. I think I had that happen once before and we still got the recording.
Okay, well, fingers crossed.
Yeah, well, you know how it is with tech, and this is something I should have foreseen because it happened just at our last meeting and I forgot what it was that caused that. And it's never, if you have any doubts, never open chat when you're doing share screen. And that's all I'll say on that.
Well, I have to go again. I want to say thank you, Effie, for a very nice and brilliant presentation. As I said, stretch. And I'm happy that I'm back after a
Yeah.
long
Yeah.
period
really.
of, yeah, that was something. And so nice, everybody. Hello, and I'll see you next presentation. And thank you again, Effie, it was great.
It was wonderful. Before you leave, Tim, our
Yes.
next presentation is going to be Oleg Gang on the self-replicating robots.
Oh,
Nano.
wow, very, very
Yeah,
important.
made of DNA. So
Good.
this is going to be the real Dr. Frankenstein meeting.
All right. I'll attend. Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see.
I just have two things to share with whoever is still here. One of them is that in the latest New Yorker, there's a review of a new movie about it with a robot in it. That's called I'm Your Man, which looks like it would be a lot of fun. So you might want to check that out. And then the other thing I just feel like throwing out to you is that I was at an interstellar conference, interstellar research group conference over the weekend. Gloria, something that you had written, I know was on the screen there at some point, but I don't remember exactly, you know, some kind of quote. But what was interesting about that, and I don't know, Effie, if, you know, if you're involved in all this astronomical research, etc., but they had the people from SETI or somebody from SETI was there. Everyone knows what that is, you know, search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And they were saying, and this I thought about this because of the ethics that we're talking about. They were saying, well, what happens if we actually contact somebody? What is the possibility that somebody on Earth is suddenly going to decide that they're an ambassador for whatever, you know, the signal coming in is? And it made me think of Trump, you know, and of characters like that. And oh my heavens, you know, I throw that out, you know, it's a science fiction fodder, maybe even humor fodder, but it's really something to think about. So the ethics extend way beyond just this planet.
Oh, I have a thought. You know what? You could do a whole science fiction story on what is the criteria when they say they're going to find the leader. You know, what's the algorithm that an alien group would use to figure out who is the leader? You know, that we always just say, oh, you know, they go looking for the leader, but they might have a totally different algorithm. Nancy, do you have a final thought or anything?
I mostly thought the ethical concerns, the ones we're really going to have to deal with, and nobody really wants to start dealing with them.
Oh yeah, that's a
Because they're
minefield.
difficult.
You couldn't pay me enough to go solve that.
That's right. And I don't know that they're ever going to be easy. I guess I'll just be thankful I'm probably not going to be around when they're going to have to be solved.
Another reason to be glad we're old, eh?
Because it will certainly be a challenging time when these things really do come to fruition. Because there are really good benefits you can get from it, and then there are really horrible outcomes you could see.
It's a sword of Damocles. And we had a speaker at that alumni luncheon group, Nancy, that we both belong to. Remember Wolfgang Fink when he came? His name was Wolfgang Fink. And he's, I think he's some kind of electronic engineer. And he was one of the people involved with, I forget what he created. He had something to do with that marching dog, or at least he featured that. You know what I'm talking about? It's this giant DARPA, the DARPA dog animal that marches along. Effie, are you familiar? You look up DARPA.
Are you thinking of the Boston Robotics?
Yeah, Boston Robotics or Dynamics. It's this thing that looks like a giant dog or nondescript animal and just goes charging along. And but it looks so much like the mechanical hound in Fahrenheit 451. And you know how that was used. I'm assuming you've all read, I mean, everybody here must
Fahrenheit
know
451.
451, but it wasn't in the film version. It was in the novel. There was a thing called the Mechanical Hound. And I think it was in the modern film. They made a remake of it. Then they had the Mechanical Hound. And it looks so much frighteningly so like this DARPA animal. All it didn't have was the fingernails, the claws that had the poison and the stuff in it. But you know, when we have these boosters like Wolfgang Fink, he only talked about all the good that could come from each of these things, and he didn't have in his mind these negative surveillance. Everybody can be chased by these giant dogs around all over, surveilling them. And that bothers me when people give tech presentations, because another one we had at the same group was about how wonderful it would be when, with all the genetic mapping and neurological mapping, when we can tell where love is, you know, where love is situated in the brain. And we'll be reading people for emotions like love, and there'll be an open book. We can tell, oh, you're in love, oh, you're not, or whatever. And in the question after that presentation of mapping the brain, and it was again all positive, everything would be good, I said, he mentioned only in passing, the man who gave that, was that when they tested one of their programs for screening out potential pedophiles from teaching staff in grade schools, and it was private school somewhere, grade, middle school, he said they got so many false positives for pedophile that they had to throw it out. And before that, he'd said, we hardly have any error. And I said, you know, that he only mentioned that in passing. And then, you know, he said, well, that one we had to throw out. So there's a big potential for ruining lives over this, because once labeled, it will follow you nowadays, where anything that's said about you exists. And maybe we should hold our speakers more accountable when we go to a public lecture, that they not only give how positively these things can impact our lives or affect our lives, but remember that every one of these developments is a sword of Damocles, that for every good, it could have a potential not good. And hold our speakers and popularizers accountable. What do you think of that, Effie?
I think it's hard once it gets out the door.
Yeah, but I mean, they're not telling. It's more of a promotional talk than a truly scientific talk that would give both aspects of it. That's what I'm objecting to. Is that a valid thing to bring up? Many people.
Yeah, I think any of those ethical concerns should be better earlier than later.
And especially in this one talk where he contradicted himself, and it was only a little, you know, parenthetical aside where he said, oh yeah, we did one at a school and there were so many false positives that we had to throw it out. And the rest of the whole hour, he'd been saying there's hardly any error. I'm going to have to turn this off, my speaker off, because we have a noisy air conditioner. So
I know the lecture we had yesterday, I was surprised where he had all the scientific jargon. And then when push came to shove, he said, take a look at what once happened. And it just made all nonsense of all the scientific studies and statistical analysis. Because if it once was this bad, it probably can do that again. Despite
I don't think it was quite that, what he said. I was there also. I think what he said is that they do not communicate, these geologists and hydrologists, well to the public. It was more of scientific communication he was criticizing. They do not communicate that when they say 100-year flood, they're not talking about literal years. They're talking about a statistical average, an algorithm that constructs years from data, and that people take it, oh, we're not due for another one. And so it's more, it isn't that the data is no good. It's that the communications set up, he called it a double misinformation, doubly.
Oh yeah,
wrong.
well, actually the data wasn't very good either.
Well, no, he
only had one point that generated the whole stuff. So it was
the normal things. He said it wasn't as good for the outlier events, which these things that are happening, he said, are extreme outliers that are almost astronomically improbable, but they have happened. So he said in the normal range of the curve he showed, then some of those projections were good. But that when they tell the public It's the
Yep.
100-year flood that he was challenging, especially that. And perhaps that we do need to factor in more the outlier in these prognostications, factor the extreme outlier in, which they haven't been doing. But that doesn't invalidate, my difference here is that doesn't invalidate the effort, the enterprise of doing prediction. It's just that he's saying they have been faced with a magnitude of difference than what they had previously been faced with because
You
of
have to
climate
be
change.
careful how you use it.
Yeah, and also amend your algorithm because climate is in flux, and don't just keep using the old algorithm. And I think there is science fiction in that too, this super flood and mega flood. And if I'd been running that, I would have gotten a recording so people could see it, because it was a fantastic talk about not only how mega floods formed on Earth. Oh, by the way, his name is Victor Baker, and he studies super flooding, not only on Earth, but on Mars.
Mhm.
He's
Those were the
involved.
biggest floods, yeah.
Yeah, and he did a fantastic job. So, if you're interested in any of that for science fiction, keep that in mind. Keep that man in mind. So, do we have any more
Nope.
questions, Bob? Question? No question from Bob. So, well, then I will thank Effie, and we hope to have you back sometime, and we'll tell everybody about you and what a great talk this was. So,
Thank you so
Once
much for
again,
having
thank
me.
you, Effie.
yeah, thank you again, and keep up your good work. And it's very inspiring to hear someone
Yeah.
talk about these things so knowledgeably.
Have a great
Thanks for
rest of your
coming, everybody. And have
Bye-bye.
a good rest of your
Bye.
morning.
We're leaving.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to try to log off at some point. But Ian, did you have anything you wanted to say before I attempt to log off?
No, it was very entertaining and very interesting, and I learned a lot. I'd just like to summarize what she said and how it's useful to us. First of all, don't project what today's technology is. Look at tomorrow's technology and the day after's technology and project that. That helps to future-proof your writings. So what you're writing about doesn't become ha, stupid. It becomes more realistic. So that's what I learned from that. Also, don't necessarily try and project as one technology. As she's suggesting, take all the technologies and combine them all together and mix and match them to fit your own needs and to write your own story with that. And don't just follow one, as I do in mine, idea that the person will have a communicator. Wrap everything up in that together with all the other technologies around, like self-healing, like fancy clothes and fancy materials. So I thought that was a very useful hint on her part.
Oh, she gave
just
a lot
to-
of them. Yeah,
Sorry?
she gave a lot of very useful
Oh,
hints.
yes. The other thing is that I've noticed for my own writing is it's useful not to go too deeply in things, but also to only research them as deeply as you really have to. And in other words, go to Wikipedia, but don't go to ResearchGate. Go to the obvious place that your reader might go to, and use those as materials to build up the factual part of what you're writing about. And also, I've always assumed that the reader can use Wikipedia. And if the reader doesn't know what VR is or AR or something, then they can just quickly look at Wikipedia, because that will be available to them on the sidelines and it won't take them long to look it up. So this saves you from having to copy and paste from Wikipedia into your science fiction to explain everything.
Right.
So that's
Well,
my idea.
We're having different dimensions in science fiction, because this deals with the technological, and it didn't really have much to say, although we alluded to it, of the human and the sociological. And what's his name? Sam Miller is coming to speak about that branch. That's the H.G. Wells branch. In the Time Machine, he didn't give any science. So you didn't know how that thing worked at all.
Hmm.
And yet it was a very strong science fiction. We didn't have the term science fiction then, but it was a strong science fiction thing, you know, although the science was goofy in a lot of places, but some places not as goofy as others. So her admonition would have been failed by H.G. Wells and many other science fiction writers who have done more what you would call Swiftian satire, you know, satire of the current day society using science fiction. And you may think that's less science fiction, but you can't say H.G. Wells isn't a science fiction writer. So what do you say to that?
Yes, I agree with that. The other last thing I'd like to put across is that I quickly looked at some of the titles of the books she's been writing, and Effie is not scared about having a wacky title. So I think that's a good idea. It makes a title memorable, and also ensures that the reader can recommend it easily to somebody else because it's stuck in their minds.
Okay, so you broke up a little. Did you say her titles are memorable?
They are memorable, yes.
Oh, that's good. That's always good.
The one I
Well-
picked up was how to steal $1 million, in round brackets, dollars, close brackets, dinosaur. And that's a unique title, one that'll stick in my mind forever. I read it once and it's stuck in my mind. But that is a way to have a good title.
It doesn't hurt. So, well, I'm so glad you were able to make it from the longest distance of any of our viewers today, participants.
Thanks.
And is it very cold there in South Africa?
Rainy and cold, yes.
Oh, okay.
The spring
Well-
rains.
Yeah, it's getting warmer though where you are, so you'll be having better weather soon, I hope.
Yes. Thank you for organizing, Gloria.
Well, thank you. And now if I can just get it turned off, that will be my next challenge. So I have to go back in the other room to turn off the meeting.
Okay.
It's just wacko in there. Oh, and Bob is still here, so say goodbye, Bob, or whatever.
Bye, Bob.
Okay, he says goodbye.
Let me show you. You're probably full screen. It's probably-
Back to Zoom on my here in my
Show all the other
account.
stuff first.
Okay. No, I didn't show that. Oh, yeah. It won't. I tried this. This one will, that one. won't. No, I just want to go back. No, I have to go in. I just have to go into Zoom and try to get into my account. There, I can end it.